Okay, so picture this. We're inside the most secure federal prison ever built, Alcatraz. They called it the Rock, right? An inescapable fortress surrounded by these freezing, just treacherous waters of San Francisco Bay. But on one quiet night back in 1962, a plan is unfolding. And it doesn't rely on brute force. No, this is about pure, unadulterated engineering genius. Let's get into it.
To really get your head around the sheer audacity of what they were about to attempt, you have to understand the odds. In the prison's entire 29-year history, 34 men had tried to escape. They were up against guard towers, insane currents, and the island's sheer cliffs.
And the official number of confirmed successes out of all those attempts? 0. A big, fat 0. Not a single one. Every single man was either recaptured, shot, or just swallowed by the bay. The odds weren't just bad, they were literally impossible. So, how do you engineer your way out of impossible?
Well, it all starts with a whisper, and with a guy named Frank Morris. Now, his official file says he has a genius-level IQ. He'd actually broken out of other prisons before. But come on, this was Alcatraz. And he knew the key wasn't breaking through the bars, it was going through the very walls of his cell.
This right here? This is the prison's one critical design flaw. You see, Morris was a master observer, and he noticed something that nobody else had. The concrete around the air vent in his cell was being eaten away by decades of salt air. It was getting soft, and right on the other side of that crumbling wall was his target. This dark, totally unguarded utility corridor, basically a secret highway running the entire length of the cell block.
But the initial plan had a huge, huge problem. Morris was literally chipping away at concrete with a stolen spoon. At that pace, it would take months, maybe even a year. And with guards checking every single detail of the cells every single day, getting caught wasn't just a risk, it was pretty much a guarantee. They had to be faster, and they had to be quieter.
So, they engineered a solution. And this is where the real genius kicks in. This was like a miniature industrial project, all happening in secret. One of the guys, Alan West, worked on prison maintenance. He managed to snag a motor from a vacuum cleaner that he'd, conveniently written off as broken. Then, they completely MacGyvered it into a makeshift drill, powering it right from the cell's light socket. Unbelievable.
Okay, so you have a drill. Great, but a drill makes a ton of noise, right? And Alcatraz runs on a schedule of near total silence. So how do you pull this off? You wait for music hour. It was the 1 hour a day prisoners could actually play instruments. So while Frank fired up that drill, Alan would sit in his cell next door playing his concertina. And that music became the perfect cover for the sound of their escape being chiseled out of the wall.
Right, so the drill is working, the tunnels are getting bigger every single night. And that brings them to their next impossible problem. You've got a giant hole in the back of your cell, a cell that gets inspected every single day. How on earth do you hide that from guards whose only job is to notice stuff like that?
You do it with an absolute masterpiece of deception. This is a fake vent, made for nothing but stolen cardboard and soap. They painstakingly collected tiny paint chips from all over the prison, ground them up into a powder, and then mixed them to create the exact shade of grimy, salt-stained green on the cell wall. It was so perfect, they could just pop it into place before inspections, and nobody ever had a clue. Okay, let's move to the next phase. The tunnels are done. They can now slip out of their cells at night and roam that Secret Service corridor. So they've breached their cages, but they're still trapped in the fortress. Getting off the rock means crossing the bay, and for that, you need a boat. The question is, where in the most secure prison on Earth do you find the space to build one?
Well, they found a forgotten, sealed-off area on the top tier of the cell block and turned it into a secret workshop. Over months, they scrounged and stole over 50 of the prison-issue raincoats. Frank, using the intense heat from the steam pipes, essentially melted the seams together. It's a process called vulcanizing, to create a 6 by 14-foot inflatable raft. They carved paddles from scrap wood, and that concertina, its second job was to be the pump to inflate the whole thing.
But their greatest trick, their most clever piece of engineering, was all about one thing: buying time. To fool the guards during the nighttime head counts, they sculpted these chillingly realistic dummy heads. The base was a mix of soap, wax, and toilet paper. But the masterstroke was the hair. They collected it, strand by strand, from the floor of the prison barbershop to make the decoys look like they were actually sleeping in their bunks.
And this is it, the night of the escape. At 9:30 p.m., the final head count comes through. The guards peer in, they see the dummy heads, and they move on. The deception works. By 10:40, Morris and the two Anglin brothers meet up in that dark corridor. But Alan West?
Their fourth man, he's not there. The tide is turning, and they just can't wait. By 11 p.m., they're using the plumbing as a ladder, climbing 30 feet to a roof ventilator. At 11:30, they are out, inflating the raft and slipping into the black, freezing waters, aiming to ride that outbound tide to freedom.
So what about Alan West, one of the key architects of this whole plan? Well, in a heartbreaking twist of fate, his own meticulous work was his downfall. To make sure his fake vent wouldn't fall out during an inspection, he'd secured it with a tiny bit of cement, but it held too well. He couldn't get it loose in time. As he's frantically chipping away, he can hear his partners leaving. Frank Morris had to make a brutal choice: wait for West and miss the tide, or go. He chose to go.
You know, breaking out of the building was really just level 1. Look at the final gauntlet they had to run. They had to somehow navigate the rooftop in the pitch dark, trying to avoid the sweeping beams of the searchlights. Then they had to scale a 12-foot fence topped with barbed wire. And even after all of that, their final opponent was the bay itself, a mile and a half of 50-degree water with currents strong enough to pull a person straight out to sea. Deadly.
And this is where the story just fractures into legend. The official conclusion from the FBI? They drowned. Case closed. The evidence on that side? Pieces of their raft and a waterproof pouch of personal items washed up. But the argument for survival is just as compelling. First, and this is a big one, no bodies. Ever. In a bay that almost always gives up its dead. And then, there are these strange reports. Flowers sent anonymously to the Anglin brothers' mother every single year. An incredible sighting of 2 men disguised as women at that same mother's funeral.
And that leaves us with the question that has haunted this story for over half the century. Did their genius, their incredible engineering, get them all the way to shore? Did they vanish into thin air and pull off the greatest escape in American history? Or did that final, deadly obstacle, the San Francisco Bay, claim them, just like all the others? The FBI officially closed the case back in 1979, but the mystery, well, that remains unsolved, lost somewhere out there in the cold, gray water.